Hey guys, Peter here to do an album review. Today I'm here to tell you about the debut record from Frozen Soul, Crypt of Ice, out January 8th on Century Media. This album has 10 tracks and is 40 minutes in length. Now, considering that this is a debut record, I'll give you guys a very brief bio on the band. They're from Fort Worth, Texas, USA, and they play death metal. Now, the style of death metal, or the soundscape of their approach to death metal, is different from what I was expecting. I was expecting something that you would feel like it would come out of the USA. And when you listen to this band, you get more of an European vibe, not only to their soundscape, but to also how they constructed this record. And let's start off with that construction. This is an album that, in my opinion, is very linear from top to bottom. There's no pivots, there's no peaks, and there's no valleys. What you get in the first song, it pretty much stays steady, stays cohesive and balanced all the way through to the last track. Having said that, this is not an album that feels repetitive. This is the overall perception that you get from the record, but that doesn't mean every song is built in the same way and offers the same sound approach. When you start looking at the individual tracks on this album, you start to see the differences. You see the difference of construction, you see the difference of how the elements were merged together, how they were put forward, how the songs start off, how they finish, how they intertwine with each other. All of these things are changing and perhaps evolving as you progress through the album. But the sensation that you get when you take a step back and you listen to this record is that there is an overall soundscape. There is definitely a DNA, a fingerprint that this band implemented on their sound, and it's definitely obvious with this album. One of the things that I like about this structure and this approach is that they allowed some songs to interconnect with each other, where one song ends, the next song starts. So this makes the album a lot more fluid and a lot more dynamic, and it takes away a little bit of that sense of repetition from track to track. You feel like something is flowing a lot better, you feel like the songs are intertwining with each other a lot better, and there's a sense of continuity as far as your listening experience is concerned. That is something that's very important for a band that's releasing a debut record. It shows a lot of maturity, not just from a track construction, but how they put the overall album together. Now, as far as soundscape is concerned, this album is powerful and menacing. I love the overall sound that it has. It's very robust. It feels thick. It has volume, but you still hear all the different elements coming at you in a very balanced approach. You hear the drums, you hear the guitars, you feel the bass here and there, one song more, one song less, but you feel it there. And then you have the vocals that are coming on top of it and kind of the glue that holds this whole album together. But you feel all of the different elements. There's not one element necessarily that's overpassing everything else. There are some elements within the overall soundscape that have more of a predominant role, but they're not necessarily on top of everything and covering everything else that is happening. You really feel all the different pieces that made these songs. And when you can feel those different pieces coming together in unison, you feel like the sound overall becomes bigger, becomes thicker, it becomes heavier, and it comes at you almost like an avalanche of sound. That's the experience that you're going to get when you listen to this album. Now, once you get deeper into the sound, the first element that you're going to notice is the guitars. And the guitars have a duality of approaches. In some songs, they feel more driven, more penetrating, like they're really cutting through you and how they sound and how they're coming across. In some tracks, they feel a little bit more chunky. They have a little bit more meat on the bone, and they come across in a more grittier kind of way. There's tracks where you feel that there's a mixture of these two styles, these two approaches, and they kind of intertwine between the verses and chorus in terms of which one they're going to go with. But overall, this is the duality of sound that you're going to get from the guitars, which within the songs themselves allow the tracks to feel very dynamic. The ups and downs that you're not going to get throughout the record, you're going to get on the individual songs, and a lot of the times it's coming from how the guitars are put together, how they're coming forward, and how they're dictating the pace and the tempo of the album. The other element of the sound that's extremely important is the drums. The guitars would not feel the way they do if they didn't have the powerful drums behind them. They're not necessarily always coming into the forefront. They do come into the forefront a lot more than I was expecting. I was thinking they were going to have more of a secondary role, just creating this bass line, just creating this foundation, and allowing the guitars to really dictate everything that's happening in the tracks. And overall, that is the predominancy of the approach, but it's not the case on every single song throughout this record. There's a lot of tracks where the drums take a step forward, almost pushing the guitars out of the way and saying that, hey, I want to dominate this track. I want to push this song forward. I want to create the heaviness. I want to create the power that this song has to offer. So I love what they did with the drums, not allowing them to have a secondary role all the time throughout the record, and allowing the drums to peek into the forefront a lot more often than what I was expecting. And that allows the record to be even bigger. It's one of those elements that adds to that overall volume, to that overall sound, to that overall presence that this record has. As far as vocals are concerned, that's perhaps the most consistent and less dynamic element of the album. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You don't want the vocals to change too much on a record like this. You want them to be consistent. You want them to have a very consistent approach from the first song to the last song. But I would have liked to see a little bit of variety. Not necessarily on every track, but throughout the album, 2 or 3 songs, a few changes here and there, either as an intro or as a bridge or even as an outro, would have added a spice, would have made you stop for a little bit and peek your head up and say, whoa, what just happened there? What was that? And that sometimes is important on a record that is this balance all the way throughout. Because when you have an album like this, that is this cohesive, that is this balanced from the first to the last song, you tend to get lost in the overall atmosphere that the album creates, in the overall soundscape that the album creates. And by the time you get to the end, sometimes it's hard to see the forest from the trees. So adding a few different changes as far as the vocals are concerned, because sound-wise the album doesn't really go that far. So the one element that you could perhaps change a little bit without overall impacting how the album feels too much is the vocals. And I felt that they were extremely balanced. What you get in the first song, definitely what you're going to get throughout the whole record, and I wish there was a little bit more of a dynamic mechanism within some tracks to kind of elevate the experience that those tracks had to offer. Having said that, I like how they sound, I like how they come across. They are almost hidden in the mix and they feel like they're coming from the depths of hell into the forefront. It's a style that I really enjoy, specifically with death metal, and specifically with death metal that has this sort of grit, this sort of power, this sort of volume as far as guitars and drums are concerned. So I felt that they have the perfect approach as far as vocals are concerned for the style and sound that they have in store for the listener. Just a slight piece of variety there would definitely add a different element and a different flavor to the overall experience of this record. Maybe something for their next album. Overall, I really enjoyed this album. We have to keep in mind, this is a debut record. This record would be a solid album by any standards. Doesn't matter if this was the first or the 10th album of any band out there. But the fact that this is their debut record, it really says volumes about the quality and talent of this band. Sky's the limit. They can do incredible things if they stick to their guns. They understand all the great things that they did about this album that worked, and all the things that they can improve in order to take steps forward in making their sound a little bit more diverse, having a little bit more life into how they construct some of their songs. But overall, this is a magnificent debut record. Now, as far as songs are concerned, this was a hard one because I really enjoyed this album top to bottom. But I picked 3 songs that, at the first glance going through them, outside of the singles, these were immediately hits in my perspective. And I want to start off with Arctic Stronghold. This is a great song. The guitars open up the sound and they're very driven, very penetrating. And then they start to become a little bit more meatier. They start to become a little bit chunkier. They start to change their approach. They become a little thicker, a little heavier. And that allows the song to alternate the tempo that it has. It alternates a slower, more methodic approach with a more diverse, more fluid, more dynamic, more aggressive sound. And those are the 2 elements that this track has to offer that really changes the perspective of the listener, because they're coming one after the other. So you'd never have a chance to really feel comfortable with one style or with one approach, because the 2 are constantly changing. They're constantly morphing from one to the other. Now the transitions between them are flawless, which allows the song to be dynamic and not feel broken when you have 2 different approaches, 2 different tempos, 2 different styles. Next, Hand of Vengeance. This is my favorite track on the album. I love the piano opening. They need to do more of this stuff, and they need to do this as far as outros is concerned as well. But I love this piano opening. It's so somber, and then that feel, that vibe, that atmosphere, it kind of leads itself into the track and how the guitars sound. The guitars took a little bit of that darkness that the piano had, and they immersed themselves in it and allowed that to kind of dissipate throughout the rest of the song. So the song carries on that somber vibe that the piano had in the intro, and I love that. It allows the guitars to have more of a penetrating sound. They don't feel as chunky, they don't feel as thick, they feel a little bit more driven in their approach, which allows the song to be rich in sound, to be warm, but still have aggression, still have intensity. The drums are ferocious at times. This is a song where the drums come in and come out, but every time they come in, you know that they're there because they're absolutely demolishing and heavy and brutal and adding a lot of aggression to the overall presence that the track has. Perhaps every time the guitars drop out, the drums are there to take their spot as far as aggression is concerned. Definitely my favorite song on the album. Last but not least, Faceless Enemy. This is a drum-driven track. Almost every song on this album is really pushed forward by the guitars. They really dictate where the tracks are going. But on this song, I felt that the drums were behind the steering wheel. They are on the driver's seat, and they're really dictating where this track is going to go. And they start off in the most powerful way possible. What an opening salvo. You know that you're in for a track that's going to have heavy drums the moment this song starts. You're not just going to put that at the intro of the track and then not use that same style, that same approach throughout the song. It would make no sense whatsoever. Why put it there and then not use it? And that's exactly what happened here. They put it at the intro and then they kept bringing those drums back with a lot of power, a lot of heaviness, providing the song not just a foundation as far as the drums are concerned, for the guitars to be a little bit more dynamic, to be a little bit more fluid, alternating styles, alternating approaches, but also allowing that heaviness to never dissipate regardless of whatever else is happening within the songs. You feel like the guitars sometimes try to push the song forward. They try to be the driver of this track, but overall you always feel like the drums are the ones really dictating where this track goes, not just as far as direction, but also heaviness. This is it. Frozen Soul, Crypt of Ice, out January 8th, debut record on Century Media. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.